Neighborhood History channel and to our live stream Q&A, Ask Me Anything, where you can get all of your questions about history and social studies answered in a timely, friendly manner, as I adjust my microphone here, which is about to fall for some reason. This is our second part of our Q&A that we do every Friday and Saturday, and we've just changed it, so now we do our Q&As on Fridays at 6 as usual, but Saturdays is at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you are used to seeing me a few hours later on Saturdays, this is our new time, and it allows our international friends who come and ask history about their countries and their areas of the world all the time, which I really, really enjoy, to come and join us. So Mr. Bill, good to see you. Guy Hahan and Idea, nice to have you here. Hello, and welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel and to our second part of our Q&A. We do these Q&As every Friday and Saturday. Please like and subscribe for more Friendly Neighborhood History content. We are also doing our live stream lecture tomorrow. That'll be instead of at 4, at 3 because of a schedule obligation on my part, so I will be doing it a little bit earlier than I normally do it. We will also have our, after this, for members, if you become a member, which for a small fee every month you get early access, bonus features, and extra videos, including a once-a-month members-only Q&A, which is usually a smaller, more intimate Q&A, gets into more details. I can go into more depth onto certain topics that's related to history and social studies, which is what we do here all the time, 24/7, 365 or 366 days a year. So yeah, join us at 4 p.m. Eastern today. Directly after this live stream is over, this Q&A, we will be doing our Q&A for our members only. So please come and join us for that and become a member. It's a small fee. I was going to say it's free to sign up, but it is free to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. So please consider doing that. I'm looking forward to going over this Q&A with all of you today and going through all this information. Now, this is a historical background that I think is really important and pertinent. It is the Japanese internment after Executive Order 9066 in 1941 or 1942. The federal government began interning Japanese Americans, hundreds of thousands, over the next 3 years as they believed they were a direct threat to the U.S. peace and stability in the last World War, or what you call World War II, what I believe is World War III. So thank you, Guy Han. I'm glad you're listening and thinking of questions. So there's a little bit of history for you to start off, talking about Japanese internment. And then there was Kurosawa, I think it was his name. He was a gentleman who tried to protest against this and took his case all the way to the Supreme Court, which rejected his motion and then 75 years later reneged and said they made the wrong decision. One of the more dark moments in Supreme Court history. And if you want to learn all about Supreme Court history, I suggest you check out my long-form series on the Supreme Court, where I give a history of the Supreme Court from George Washington until today. So good afternoon to all of you guys. I'm in my Friendly Neighborhood studio. I'm in my history Hefner robes that turn me into history. Hefner, smoking jackets inspired by British officers who brought back Turkish tobacco from the Ottoman Empire after they helped them defeat the Russians, surprisingly, in the Crimean War of the 1850s. So yeah, think about if you have questions, topics, or comments you'd like to discuss regarding history and social studies, please drop it in the chat, and I will be sure to respond to it in a timely manner. We'll go for about an hour here, and then we're ending the live stream, but if you are a member or become a member, you can join us for our members-only Q&A that we do once a month. So if you are a member or have been a member or want to be a member, it's a monthly fee. It really helps the channel. All the money that goes into this channel, whether by that or by super chats or by gifts, goes into creating content, improving the technology and the content that we use for this channel in order to make it as good as possible for all of you. So a happy into February, and we're happy that you're celebrating your weekend with us here at the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we do history in a friendly, neighborly manner, but also take things really, really important. Anyways, we've got my moderator, Harry, holding down the chat. And like I said, we'll be here for about an hour answering your questions as we do every Friday and Saturday. Fridays at 6, Saturdays at 3. So what do we want to talk about? What is on your mind? I'd be happy to discuss it. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. I'm in my Friendly Neighborhood studio and in my History Hefner robes. Yesterday I was in a tie for formal attire, which I usually do for the live streams. But today I was feeling casual, so I threw on the robe. And I'll be keeping the robe on as we switch over at the 4 o'clock hour to our members only, which I'm really looking forward to. XRP versus BTC. Don't know. I've got a little bit of money in XRP. It's not gone anywhere, and I've lost a lot of it. But XRP was all the rage, 6 months ago or something? It really didn't turn out to pan out to be exactly what we expected it to. So, anyways, other questions, topics, things you'd like to discuss. Yeah, we've been doing this for just over 2 years. We just celebrated our second year anniversary. It's President's Day weekend, which is a perfect anniversary for a History Channel. So yeah, there's that, and we do these live streams for. We've been doing these live streams for about a year and a half or so. So, anyways, am I coming in clear? Can everybody hear me and see me? Okay. What do you guys want to talk about? What history are you interested in? I've got my background about one of the famous orders of the carrying out of Executive Order 9066. These notices were posted all over California and the West Coast, forcing Japanese into internment camps. Probably one of the darker moments in American history on display in my background, but an important part of American history that we don't talk about enough. So, all right, well, you can ask it now, Harry. There's not a lot of people here and nobody wants to ask questions, so I'm more than willing to answer and indulge whatever you want to discuss. So let's see. Why is the West blamed for all the problems in the Middle East, or what seems to be every problem in the Third World? Colonization, imperialism, and neoliberal and neo-conservative post-colonial relations and neoliberal and neo-conservative projects and exporting democracy, the war in Iraq, the war on terror, things like this are why the West is normally blamed for the problems in the Middle East. You have to understand that the problems in many of what we call the Third World, or the peripheral world is a more appropriate modern term, are due to the fact that the West interfered in these areas, exploited them, robbed them, oppressed them for a long time, and the extraction of these resources, manpower, and the lack of independence and self-determination led to a lot of problems. You also have to understand that there are cultural clashes that occur, not just in the wars that occurred in the Middle East and other places, the war on terror and things like that, but also in the migration of a mass amount of people from Africa, North Africa, and the Middle East to Europe and America. There is a huge cultural difference between someone who was raised in Somalia and someone who was raised in New Jersey. They have very, very different tastes, but now all of a sudden they're supposed to live together. This is extremely hard, and all migration is hard. All immigration comes with detractions and lack of problems, no matter where you are and when you are in human history. So, hello, Jeff. I would like to discuss the last time. Okay, yeah. No, it was last night. So, do you think that people can truly blame Arthur Balfour for the problem in Palestine, Israel? Blaming the British and colonization is something that both sides do in order to divert attention from their own failures and moral culpabilities in the problems between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I don't think the British Empire, and I don't think any empire or the United States can be blamed for all of the problems in the Middle East and Africa. I am saying that the extractive codependent relationships of colonialism and followed up by exporting democracy and basically saying we know what's best for you in the war on terror, for instance, has had deleterious effects on cultures and areas of the world that are significantly different. And because those cultures had took a significantly huge cultural hit because of the actions of the United States and other imperial powers, now the United States and those imperial powers, those erstwhile imperial powers, are taking hits from the cultural conflict of migrants from those areas, destabilized by those actions, moving into their areas for better benefits and better lives. So, yeah, when in Rome, do as the Romans do is easy to say, hard to live out. So my whole point is I'm not going to blame. I already said that colonial oppression and imperialism caused huge amounts of problems in the world, but I'm not going to blame all of the problems of Africa and the Middle East on Westerners and what Westerners do and say. That would be extremely unfair and would remove any sort of moral agency or culpability, in a way, remove some of the humanity from the people of Africa and the Middle East. I wrote on my Substack, yes, I have a Substack, a Patreon, a TikTok, all of that stuff. It's usually under the handle Friendly History, and that you can follow me there for more stuff like my articles. But I said very clearly in an article that to say that third world peoples do not have any moral culpability and cannot be blamed for any of this is to treat them with a patronizing attitude that removes their human agency. Robert Mugabe and what he did in Zimbabwe is on his head, despite the fact that the power vacuum left behind by the colonial era didn't make things easy for the people of former Rhodesia. But Mugabe certainly made it much harder for them. Idi Amin made it harder in, Uganda. Places like this, Gaddafi and Libya. We talked about this yesterday. So it's a complex issue. On top of that, would you agree that it would have been better for the UK to maintain? Why are we timing out so many people? On top of that, would you agree that it would have been better for the UK to maintain its operations in the Levant instead of total abandonment we were forced into? No. I don't know necessarily. I think the pressure for an Israeli state to emerge and the refusal of the Arabs to allow them a state wasn't going to change anytime soon. I don't think the British could have done anything to ameliorate that circumstance. Yes. Yes, Steve, I'm aware of what Lincoln said to the states. I'm aware of what Lincoln stood for. You don't know what the Republican Party platform of 1860 was. I don't know what this crusade against Abraham Lincoln is, but it's not going to change my mind. I've been very consistent about all of this. I know all of these things. They don't change my mind. They don't influence my decision. They're bogus. It is a way to discredit the great emancipator who freed the slaves, who always wanted the slaves to be free. He said that he wouldn't interfere. That was the Republican Party platform. They believed slavery was a dying institution that would fall off eventually. Lincoln did not intentionally begin to start to free the slaves until 1862 and 1863. Oh well, I'm just reading right now. It's just coming through. Ali Khamenei has been killed in the U.S.-Israel airstrikes in Iran. So that's just blowing up out of proportion, by the way. But I just saw the banner flash across me from a news source. So Ali Khamenei is dead, the supreme leader of Iran, the head of mullahs who run the Islamic Revolution, the Islamic Republic of Iran. So who knows what's going to happen there anytime soon. Anyways, let's get to the actual history. Is Japan truly living in the year 2050 while the rest of us are living in 2026? I don't know. I don't know how advanced Japan is, but they have great reputations for cleanliness, good hygiene, lack of homelessness, economic prosperity. They have robotic technology, but they also have a population that is dying off quite heavily. They have some of the lowest birth rates in the world, and the Japanese population will continue to decrease unless they change their policies on migration or see a rapid increase in natural births. Lincoln should have sent back all European ancestry slave owners. Okay. Zimbabwe and Robert were their own fault. The British government intervened in 1981, I think it was, and got the Lancaster House Agreement signed. Yes, but I'm not saying that I'm saying Mugabe is the fault, that Robert Mugabe gets the blame for what he did in Rhodesia or in Zimbabwe. I am saying that you have a power vacuum of different cultures and tribes that have been morphed together into African countries because of the lines drawn around them at the Berlin Conference and afterwards by the Europeans in their scramble for Africa that forced different tribal groups and peoples to be around each other when they absolutely hated and despised one another. So, is the Confederate flag racist? This is a good question. Many people in the South, even African Americans, in the past have seen it as part of their culture, as representative of their culture. It's inspired by the flag of Mississippi, which was one of the first states to secede from the Union in 1861, which was illegal, by the way, Steve. For you listening, Steve, it was illegal for them to leave the Union, which is why a war happened. But they started that war anyways. So, my point being, Ali, that I don't think that there's anything. I think that the Confederate flag represents the Confederacy, and the Confederacy fought to preserve the Southern way of life, which was slavery, which depended on racism. So yes, I would say that the Confederate flag is indeed racist. Yeah. I used to be afraid of speed bumps, but I'm slowly getting over them. That was fun. Thank you, Pest. That was good. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was out of desperation, a military necessity aimed at weakening the Confederacy and only freed slaves of his literal enemies. Except that that's not true. That's not what happened. Lincoln decided to reorient the war after Antietam to push away Britain and France from recognizing the Confederacy while also attempting to undermine the Southern economy and hopefully liberate slaves. And everywhere the Union Army conquered in the South, they freed the slaves that were there, which is why Juneteenth is celebrated, because it was when the Union Army finally located and freed the final slaves in Texas. That's why Juneteenth is celebrated, because it was a carrying out of the Emancipation Proclamation. It was not done out of necessity. There was no need to do an Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln made the war into a moral thing, and this encouraged African Americans, like the Massachusetts 54th, to join the Union Army in huge amounts. I mean, I would love to rock a zoot suit. Well, the Japanese were being interred under Executive Order 9066. Why did they fight so hard for the Americans against the Germans? What was their motivation for this? They didn't. Some of them did, but most of them were interred. Many of them were American citizens born in the United States. Where did you find such a pompous robe? It was given to me by a member of a channel. So you can become a member of a channel and get all sorts of benefits, including our members-only Q&A, which is going to be right after this. Let me see. On what basis is leaving the Union illegal? What was Lincoln's argument? My argument that I made yesterday, I think, is the concrete one. I think it's the one that the founders would have agreed with, and I think it's the one Lincoln would have agreed with, and Andrew Jackson would have agreed with. If you want to go with a Jacksonian interpretation, which was supposed to be the heart of the Democratic Party, which was the main progenitors of that leaving and secession. These were all Democrats who seceded. But Andrew Jackson had said our federal union must be preserved. The concept of unionism, there was a union party that ran a candidate named John Bell in 1860. Lincoln ran as a unionist. Unionists basically said leaving that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and the original intention of the Constitution was to unify the states so that they would not break apart and become divided states and into divided countries. That the Articles of Confederation had made the American government so weak federally that it had no ability to actually monitor the fissures between the different states, and this had led to even deeper fissures and problems that the federal government couldn't handle. The Constitutional Convention was supposed to embolden the federal government and strengthen the federal government and basically create a consensus among the states that we will follow this stronger government so that we will not break apart. The reason the Constitution even exists is so that the Union wouldn't break apart. And this is what Jackson saw, this is what Jefferson saw, and this is what Lincoln saw. So take it up with them. Let me see. Now the government is begging them all to come back, and as the last ditch. Okay, I don't really. Yeah, fine. Marijuana was made illegal because it's associated with Mexican immigrants. Pancho Villa's men smoke pot. That's not fully true. There was smear campaigns ran by William Randolph Hearst. There was, look at Reefer Madness. There was a media effort to actually ban cannabis, as they believed it had dulling effects on the mind and the brain. Is celebrated as Black Freedom Day before the 13th Amendment. Yes, I'm aware of what Juneteenth is. And it's celebrated because the 13th Amendment was being ratified, and thanks to Lincoln's efforts, it was finally ratified in December of 1865, which made it clear that slavery was no longer allowed anywhere in the United States. You still had the border states that were allowed to keep their slaves until after the war, so you have that issue as well. The Emancipation Proclamation did not free slaves in those border states. The 13th Amendment did. Hello, Faraz. Good to see you. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. If you are enjoying what you're listening to, please like and subscribe. Yes, I'm aware of the big news. They killed Ali Khamenei. I don't want to talk about Iran. I really, really don't want to talk about Iran. I've already talked about it enough today. I brought it up earlier. It's a pretty big step. The United States went way overboard, in my opinion, at least from what I'm initially seeing. I don't think they have the facts, let alone good high-grade stuff, to determine it's bad or not. Well, there are deleterious effects on marijuana, especially for people under the age of 25 when it comes to the development of the brain. There's no doubt about that. Now, I'm not saying marijuana should be illegal or can be illegal. I am simply stating facts. Talk about human evolution. This is a history channel. We know that the Neanderthals and the Homo sapiens were the two last major branches of the development so far in human evolution. However, the Homo sapiens developed the ability for a complex language so that they could communicate better, which is why they survived, and the Neanderthals died off about 200 to 150,000 years ago. There you go. That's the closest I can get. Would you agree that the drinking age in America is 21, but you can own a gun in 16 in some states? That is completely ridiculous? No. No. I don't think it's completely ridiculous. Stop trying to force me into a political position. You know, people drinking at 16, I mean, again, the development of the human mind with a substance, and a gun is not a substance, is completely different. It's a completely different category. Prior to slaves being freed, I can't find a simple, straightforward, unqualified statement by Lincoln saying that he believed slaves should be freed, much less he was fighting to free the slaves. You don't think Lincoln was against slavery. You don't think Lincoln thought that it was evil. Have you read anything about Lincoln's life? Lincoln, like most Northern Republicans, like most anti-slavery forces, believed that the way to destroy slavery was to let it die on the inside. It is absolute balderdash that the Republican Party was the abolitionist party. The abolitionists hated the Republicans. Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison, it took a long time for these guys to get on board with what Lincoln was doing because they didn't think he was radical enough. The radical Republicans were forming. They were not a fully strong political contingent till after Lincoln died. Yeah. Why is Singapore so developed? I don't know. I really don't. I don't want to talk about geopolitics, religion, or the political issues of our day. If you want me to give an analysis on that, like the stuff happening in Iran, like I always say, give a super chat. People try to drag me into this way too much. I'm not an expert on why Singapore is so successful. It's a city state. It has certain economic features of that. City states throughout history can be extraordinarily wealthy centers of learning and kind of look out for themselves and not have to worry about a larger country with different cultural, economic, and border issues. Is Ulysses S. Grant a war criminal? No. I believe prior to slaves being freed, I can't find a single straightforward, unqualified statement by Lincoln saying that he believed the slaves should be freed, nor fighting to free the slaves. You don't believe Lincoln wanted to free the slaves. You don't believe Lincoln was against slavery. You don't understand why the Republican Party was formed. You need to go watch my video about why it was formed. That Lincoln was part of that formation. So, South Korea is heavily corrupt and a culturist, is owned by Samsung. Yep, there's a lot of that. What was the difference similar about the old four civilizations? Do you mean the Babylonians, the Egyptians, and the Chinese, the Shan people, and the Indus River Valley? You obviously have a need for waterways in order to feed your crops. So they all start near rivers, be it the Nile, the Tigris, Euphrates, the Ganges, or the Wanghe, or the Yellow River, or maybe it was the Yangtze. I'm trying to remember which one. I think it's the Yangtze in the north. No, it's the Wanghe. And so the Chinese, so they all practice crop rotation. Many of them inherited practices of slash and burn agriculture to create new crops, fertile soil. City-states were extraordinarily common. The Chinese, the Indians, and the Mesopotamians especially had city-states. It was the Egyptians who created a unified kingdom that would control both the upper and lower parts of Egypt, or the upper and lower parts of the Nile. By the way, the upper Nile is what goes into Sudan. The lower Nile is what goes into the Mediterranean, despite the fact that the lower Nile is in the north. So they had similar things. They were all polytheistic for the most part. They all had paganic religions. Of course, Hinduism isn't fully developed at this time, but the bare bones of it is starting to be developed, including the Varna system. So stuff like that. Yeah. And I mean, what works in Singapore as a city-state probably isn't going to work in other places that are developed countries with all of the bells and whistles that they have. So, do you think in order to learn history, one of the best ways is to trace languages? Yes, you have to learn language, religion, and culture in order to understand history. It's impossible to do so without. You have to at least appreciate the impact of all of these things, even if you aren't particularly interested in them. Yes, I know why it's called the Upper Nile. It's lower, though. It's south. It's in the southern part of the country. Would you agree that the spray painting of a statue of Winston Churchill in Parliament Square is a disgrace and that this took place should be prosecuted for destruction of public property? Yes, the Europeans have a lot of pride in their history, despite the many atrocities of their history. I mean, the thing where everything is Zionism now is just so absurd to me. You can have a lot of problems with what Churchill did, and we should have discussions about that. But that is not the way to go about it. And by the way, there is a difference between wanting to take down statues of Napoleon and Churchill, who are French and British heroes, respectively, and figures of extreme historical importance, and wanting to take down statues of people like Jefferson Davis or Stonewall Jackson, who were rebels who separated from the United States, tried to form their own country, and then got defeated because of it and destroyed. There's a big difference. So it is not a contradiction to say, hey, from a historical perspective, it is better to take down statues of Confederate war heroes, but don't take down statues of someone like George Washington or Winston Churchill. Yes. So, what's going to happen to Iran? Okay, so I'll just address this now so we can get it out of the way, because I don't want to talk about it exhaustively. I'm sick and tired of all of the live streams, all of the content, all of the news cycle. It's not just you guys, it's everybody making everything about this one issue that happened today, and I can't talk about history. So it looks like the United States, Bennett worked on behalf with, or in coalition with Israel, to bring about the fall of the Iranian government, the destabilization of the the mullahs and the Iranian Islamic Republic. This included the killing of Ali Khamenei, who has just been confirmed dead, the head of Iran, which is the supreme leader, which is a huge blow to the Islamic Revolution, and it looks like there may be space for regime change to go on in that area. How much the United States is involved in that will be extraordinarily telling, because the United States sucks at regime change in the Middle East. The United States is the one that caused this mess 47 years ago by letting the Shah fall. That was a terrible geopolitical mistake by almost every metric imaginable. The Islamic Revolution could have easily turned into a communist revolution, so it was a failing on the part of the Cold War, and it was also a failing in that that Iran, despite the many failings of the regime of the Shah, was an ally of the United States. From a geopolitical standpoint, the United States made a bad decision, and almost every metric of life in Iran is worse now than it was 47 years ago, except for military armament and hostility towards the United States and funding of international radical Islamic terrorism. The emphasis on Shiite religion, the return of the Mahdi, radical Islamic fundamentalism has led to a lot of suffering for many people in Iran and around the world, because Iran is one of the largest sponsors of international terrorism in history. Those are all facts, by the way. I am not saying this from a political perspective. I'm saying it from a historical and geopolitical perspective. The only opinion I'm adding is that the United States made a huge mistake 47 years ago actually was then not intervening to save an ally. Now they should have enough. It looks like the best cause. If you're going to learn anything from history, we learn from history that we don't learn from history, but we should learn from history. And if we don't, we're doomed to repeat it or rhyme it, because I don't think history repeats, it rhymes. I'm combining like 3 crazy quotes about history right then and there. But the real truth of the Burke, Twain, and Hegel. But the truth of the matter is, if the United States has learned from its history, it will let it go. I put a video up where I did a quick analysis of this. President Trump said, the people of Iran, it's up to you now. Well, we'll see if it's actually up to them. How much of this is going to be the U.S. influence, and how much of this is actually going to be the Iranian people deciding what they want to do, what kind of government they want to have. That area has never experienced or practiced democracy before. It doesn't have a concept of democracy. All of the liberals who wanted democracy in 1979 became pawns and puppets of the Iranian regime, the Islamic regime, that did everything in its power to absolutely crush them afterwards. This is my quick analysis of what actually happened. This is all historically accurate, by the way, and the truth of the matter is we will see what happens next. I am expecting that the United States will probably have a hand in bringing back some sort of Shah government, but it is so early in the debacle, we haven't even gotten double confirmation that Khamenei is indeed dead, which we need nowadays because we can't trust the news for anything. So, that's what I'm going to say about this whole Iranian thing. The Iranian, it's a bold move. The Israelis wanted it. The U.S. probably is better off geopolitically if Iran is an ally instead of an enemy. Obviously, you'd rather have an ally out of an enemy of the largest populated country in the Middle East, if you can say that Iran is in the Middle East. But how deep into the rabbit hole is the United States going to go? And has it actually learned the lessons, which Donald Trump himself, in his own history, has complained about the Iraqis and the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, and what a terrible mistake it was? Is he going to simulate something similar to that? Now, for everybody who wants to rush into everything military that President Trump has ever done, it's only this president, by the way. It doesn't seem to happen with a lot of other presidents. This is not a war. Okay, the Israelis and the Iranians may be at a war. It is a military strike. Will it become a war? We will see. That remains to be seen. Is there going to be civil war that permeates throughout Iran, with the United States actively supporting and pushing a pro-democracy government against the radicals? I have no idea. I think that would be almost as foolish as what happened in Afghanistan and Vietnam, but we will see. And Iran is not the same as Afghanistan and Vietnam. However, it's very similar in many, many ways, especially to Afghanistan. And one of the most unifying principles of that area, just like in Afghanistan, is Islam. But you have a lot of tribes and a lot of different people with a lot of views on how the world should work. So there. You wanted my analysis on the Iran issue? You got it. Let's move on. Okay. I have quoted major dictionaries because you change and ignore the definitions of words. You change entire amendments. I don't care about your definitions. Your definitions are wrong. I'm sorry. Why did Russian Revolution happen? You can watch my video on the Russian Revolution, but the Russian Revolution basically occurred because of failures in the Great War, lack of resources for the peasantry, breadlines and riots that eventually led to full-out revolution. And in order to keep the army stable, the Tsar abdicated, and then later the Bolsheviks commandeered and couped this revolutionary movement and started their own revolution, which would mean the purging of all other political ideas. And that's how you get the Soviet Union. If you want to learn more about the history of the Soviet Union, watch my video on the Russian Revolution. Go and watch my live stream lectures on the Russian Revolution and the Tsars, and watch my entire series on Russian history and my entire series on the Russian Tsars. Yes, I have a lot of short and long form and live stream content about all of this because Russian history is my particular study. And come to the live stream lecture tomorrow at 3 p.m. where I will be discussing the issue of the Soviet Union, where my lecture will be on the Soviet Union. Mexicans are low-key forced to be here. If we were allowed to come and go, we'd definitely spend more time in Mexico. Except that that's not true. If you look at immigration numbers and you look at people who permanently settled, the two-way street between the United States and Mexico overwhelmingly favors the United States. In pursuit of previous question, the all-Japanese Hawaiians 442 Regimental Combat Team was among the most highly decorated in American history. Don't know much about them, but I'm assuming you are correct. Let me see here. Mexicans here in the USA are like Mr. Beast videos. Keep your hand on the car as long as you can. Once you let go, you lose the car. Okay, then. Singapore was a drug den. Singapore wanted to join Malaysia, but they didn't want the drug den. Singapore went benevolent dictatorship and forged a road to intelligence and hard work to be jailed. Okay, Zach. I despise the Islamic regime of Iran, but invading Iran is a dumb move. Yeah, that's what everyone is going to be saying because that's going to be the popular thing to say, Midnight Dracula. But, I mean, taking them out, destabilizing them, creating a possibility of a new government that is friendly to the West and is not going to sponsor terrorism is probably a good idea. But how you do that is, from a geopolitical perspective for the United States, that's probably a good idea. But how you do that is very, very difficult. Why does Alexander return from India? Why not capture it? He was defeated in India and his troops refused to keep fighting. He was basically on the precipice of a mutiny. So, Iran military is a joke. This easy win for the U.S. Quit panicking. I'll see. I'm withholding judgment on that because the Maduro thing, the Fordoro bombings, these things seem to have been quick military operations. This seems to be a much deeper entanglement into the weeds that could have some big problems, King Alfred. Let me see. Does the U.S. have a right? Does America have a right to ethnic internment, or at least internment on basis of country of origin? If China, for example, attacked the U.S. today, would America round up Chinese nationals? Hopefully not. Probably not. Unless there was actually real proof of spy work. And even then, people would be screaming on the internet all day that this is a violation of humanitarian rights because this person was just a regular American citizen. Even if they turned out to be a Chinese spy, that wouldn't matter to some people. Yeah. So I don't, yeah. I don't think that would happen. Would China round up American nationals who are living there, teaching there, traveling there? The Shah then would have had an insurgency and rebellion after rebellion. No, it really wouldn't. No, he really wouldn't have. He really wouldn't have, Harry. Or maybe the liberals would have won out because the Islamic Revolution was commandeered by Khomeini and his side to use the Marxists who wanted an actual Marxist state and the liberals who wanted democracy in Iran. They used those two factions to destroy the Shah and his government, and then they usurped them. And within a couple of decades, like Afghanistan, the U.S. would have, we're getting out. Yeah, that's not, yeah. Afghanistan and Iran are not similar in that regard, especially when you're looking at a perspective of an Afghanistan that was heavily influenced by Al-Qaeda and the different government there, as opposed to an Iran that had been an erstwhile American and British ally. And by the way, the main reason the United States was even interested in Iran is because of you guys. So it will be worse in the future if we don't strike now. I don't know about that. Will China retaliate? I don't think so. I have a question. Can you think of a U.S. president who was a good president but a bad person? What about a reverse? Good. Now we can actually get into history because I'm done talking about Iran. You've got your analysis. You've heard my perspective on it. I know a lot about the history of the region, and I don't know how well this is going to go. It could be a huge success, or it could be an absolute total disaster. Can you think of a U.S. president who was a good president but bad person? A good president but a bad person. Um, well, I would say it depends on how you go. Jefferson was a good president, owned slaves, had an affair and children with slaves, didn't free his slaves when he died. If you want to use that as the standard, um, you know, a lot of people have talked about Lyndon Johnson as a good president. I don't think Lyndon Johnson was that great of a president, but Lyndon Johnson had a lot of successes in his presidency, but was a very, very flawed, rude, despicable human being outside of the White House. Dwight Eisenhower was known for his philandering. So how do you define bad person? Um, I can't think of someone. I can't. Those are maybe the closest that I can come. As for the reverse, where you have a good president but a bad president but a good person, Jimmy Carter is the obvious example. Nobel Prize winner, wonderful humanitarian, not up for the job at all. Um, wasn't Jimmy Carter responsible for the downfall of the Shah? And would you consider Jimmy Carter one of the worst presidents ever? Yes and yes. I'm saying that if I'm sorry, and this is not about politics, but if Ford or Reagan had been president, who were the other two options from 76, the Shah wouldn't have fallen. Reagan was furious that the Shah fell. Ford wouldn't have allowed it to happen. That was a mistake. The idea of if we are just nice to these people, they will be nice to us is Folderoy and nonsense. And Jimmy Carter operated under that throughout his presidency. I mean, he does a good job with Sadat and Israel and mentioned Begin. But Carter should have looked immediately what happened to Sadat. Sadat was killed because of that. The world operates differently in other places. The past, history is a foreign country, but foreign countries are also foreign countries, and people don't know that. Let me see here. Since you mentioned the U.S.-Japan thing, why during FDR or that thing happened to Japanese Americans but not Germans? Racism. And also an Orientalism. The Germans are Europeans, so they have a common ancestry with the Angloids. They have a common language. There's a long-term, long. Let me see. Iran did have a brief period of parliamentary democracy in the early 50s before 1953 U.S.-UK backed coup. Yes, and then Mohammad Mossadegh was assassinated by the CIA. I'm aware of all of that, but the Iranians had a Shah, a ruler, a king for thousands of years. When the 1979 fall of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi actually happened, that was the end of the Shah. The Persian ruler had been known as the Shah, going back to the time of the Medo-Persians. So that's 2,500 years of history. Singapore became prosperous because they jailed all their undesirables, mostly drug addicts and other criminals. There's severe penalties for crime in Singapore. I remember when, Duterte did that in the Philippines when I was in college, and I thought, wow, that guy's crazy. What is the history of sports? Sports is interesting to me psychologically because sports is de-violentized, if you want to create a new word, de-escalated war. Competition between two sides, usually non-violent, things without killing, usually, hopefully. So. The Germans were demonized and the Japanese, many atrocities were ignored. That's true. And what happened to the Germans in Germany after 1945 is just awful, especially on the Soviet side of things. Woodrow Wilson was the worst president. You are in good company, Stephen, because a lot of people on this channel believe Woodrow Wilson is the worst president. Scarapion, thank you. Please hit the like button. You are listening to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel and to our Q&A. This is our second parter. We had our first part where we answered a bunch of questions about history yesterday, and we are having our second parter right now. And after this is over, at about 4 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be doing a members-only live for our members that we do once a month. So consider becoming a member. You get early access, bonus content, and you get that members-only live. You get another hour to talk about history and social studies with me. China has too much money invested in the U.S. If USA goes under, China loses a ton of money. Plus, Chinese military is even more of a paper tiger than Russia. No, Russia's the biggest paper tiger in the world. I didn't believe Woodrow Wilson was a bad president, but I believe he was a good president. I just think he was not a good person. Yeah, that's a good example but I don't think Wilson's a good president. I think he's pretty mid. I think the love fest of Woodrow Wilson has been met with a clapback from the internet of Woodrow Wilson is the worst, and I'm kind of in the middle. I understand a lot of what Woodrow Wilson did, and I think that Wilson's biggest success was his understanding of the changing world order. If the United States had joined the League of Nations, then I don't think the Nazis get anywhere. But that's a big what if. But anyways, Who do you think was the best president? Lincoln. What's the history of Skull and Bones? Skull and Bones is a secret society made up of extremely rich people. It's a kind of a parafraternal organization. I believe it started with, was it Harvard or Yale? But it's basically one of these clubs, like the Freemasons, like the Bilderbergers, like the Rothschilds. Well, that's one of the families that are involved. That seems to include really rich and famous people throughout its history. The Bushes are part of the Skull and Bones, for instance, that have a lot of influence on the political machinations of the world. Why is the Armenian genocide by Turkey ignored? I have an entire video on it that I think President Erdogan should watch. The Turks, it's incredible to me. All the genocides of the 20th century. The Cambodians do not lie about the killing fields. The Russians do not lie about the Holodomor, and the Germans certainly do not lie about the Holocaust. But the Turks have been very adamant that this didn't happen, or has been highly exaggerated, or the numbers are fudged, or it really wasn't a genocide. That has been an ongoing push by the Turks to say that. The problem, however, is that it was a genocide. I mean, you have 1.5 million to 2 million people dying en route as they are forced across land, and they are killed if they don't go. And the Turks basically stripped them of any ability to take care of and protect themselves from the harsh desert of Syria. So it was an intentional and horrific action by the Turks. And it is a dark chapter in Middle Eastern history. Yeah. He is the worst person who has been president, not the worst president. Okay. Why is the Armenian I already answered that. I did girls in track and field where most all events are war training. Yeah, basically. All sports are a form of war. But sports really develop when people in the Industrial Revolution in its wake develop through capital deepening and collective bargaining and other things like that, unions and whatnot, develop the workers' rights. They're able to limit their hours, but they also have developed some financial responsibility and independence. There's the need for specialization of labor, which leads to the rise of the middle class. And all of a sudden, you don't just have a bunch of workers working for dirt poor wages. You have supervisors and managers and all sorts of people. So because you have the development of a middle class, and the development of the weekend and the development of the suburbs, you have a need to entertain yourselves because now you have free time, which you've never really had before in human history before then. And so one of the things that develops is competition. Sports, baseball, and football are huge examples of that. I'm not angry. I'm tired of people wanting to control the channel. Armenian genocide was indeed a genocide, but it has been done by the Ottoman Empire, not Turkey. They are not the same entity. The Turk, tell that to a Turk. The Young Turks are a militant political organization trying to create democracy and radicalization. They are what were known as, back then they called these people Republicans. They do not mean the same thing as American Republicans. Republicanism in European context in the 19th and 20th century means people who are working tirelessly to end monarchy, empire, and colonization and create liberal democracies. So yeah, no, it wasn't them who committed it. It was the Turkish government. It was the Ottomans, who had made concessions to the Young Turks by starting to form an actual constitutional monarchy rather than a neo-absolutist monarchy. How did Turkey get its name? It's the name of the people, the Turks. The Seljuks I wasn't called Turkey throughout most of its history. Asia Minor, Anatolia, but the Ottoman Turks are the main reason it is called Turkey. Fidel. Or not the Ottomans, the Seljuks, who were the warriors during the Crusades, who started the Crusades, become the most powerful, dominant Turkic group. And because of that, because they're the most dominant force in the region, and they conquer most of Anatolia back from the Byzantines, it becomes known as Turkey. In modern American society, advocating for the forced removal of black Americans to another country would be widely condemned. Oh, for God's sakes. This is just ridiculous. You have a hate boner for Abraham Lincoln. I'm sorry to be crude, but you certainly do. That's all you talk about. It's all you care about. You lost the whole point, or you don't care about, or you're tired of arguing with me about world wars. So now it's Abraham Lincoln bad, Abraham Lincoln bad, Abraham Lincoln bad, Abraham Lincoln bad, or overrated, or whatever you think. You don't actually say what you think. You just state facts that you think are true. You state ideas that you think are true. State them as facts. Don't provide any evidence for them. And just move on. There is a huge difference contextually. I mean, it's obvious that we condemn today. There's a huge difference contextually between what happens to the slaves once they are freed in the 1800s and what happens to African Americans who have been freed for generations, who have developed their own life and traditions in America since then. Those are two completely separate issues. How does Russia reconcile the history of the Holodomor? P.S. Did you ever watch the Tucker Carlson Putin interview? Did Vladdy P give an accurate summary? Putin doesn't care. No, Putin knows Russian history. He doesn't care about Russian history. Putin has lied and deceived and manipulated the West for 25 years. If you don't know that yet, as Tucker Carlson say, then something is wrong with you. It's obvious. Everybody knows it. And if you don't know it, then you're probably lying to yourself. Yes, Tucker Carlson's an idiot. I mean, he's a useful idiot for people like Putin. He's a useful idiot for the Iranians even. Not anymore. But the truth of the matter is, I didn't watch it. I need to watch it. But Russia acknowledges the Holodomor and says, oh yeah, there were bad things. I mean, Khrushchev said that Stalin went overboard. But really, in truth, Putin idolizes Stalin. Putin's view of history is basically Russia is justified in all of its actions because the West doesn't understand the psychology of the Russian people. The second part of that is true. The first part is not. But Turkish nationalism has a wrong narrative. Modern Turkey has been created by Ataturk. The modern Republic of Turkey is created by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk as he basically gets better terms from the Treaty of Lausanne to recreate Turkey after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. He basically rewrites and restructures the treaty from the end of the war with the Allies. You see, Ottoman Empire was not democratically elected, so Turkish people at the time were not responsible, so the nation of Turkey does not owe Armenians anything. I'm not saying any country owes anyone anything, because unless the person's still alive, and no one from the Armenian genocide who survived it is alive. I'm sorry. I mean, maybe one or two people that are 115 years old, but that's about it. So no, the countries are responsible, even if they are democratically elected. Yes, you should learn the history of your country, especially if you glory in it. So, if you glory in your country's history, if you know your country's history, you have to acknowledge what happened, even when you didn't like people. That's like saying, I'm not responsible for what James Madison did because I didn't vote for him. Or if you're a Brit saying, well, I didn't vote for King George III and he's bad. So I'm not responsible. No. You're not responsible morally, but you are responsible to learn the history of these people and to learn the lessons from them. The moral lessons that we can garner, the social lessons that we can garner about how to make things better for our civilization over time. The real people have asked me, what do you think the meaning of life is? And as a social scientist and historian, that's not my expertise, but I often say it's to discover the meaning of life. Your purpose is sometimes your purpose. I know that's very existentialist, very Nietzschean of me, but I think it's true. Anyways, I'm not going to wax philosophical anymore. Does anyone want to ask any other questions about history or social studies? Remember, after this, we're going to our members-only Q&A. That will be for an hour after that, from about 4 to 5. So please join us for that. It's a bonus, like many bonuses that members get, and if you want to become a member, there are different tiers and different access for different tiers. I have no dog in the fight, but I know very well that no one would accept that argument from Americans or Germans. True. If a crime has been done by a democratically elected government, that nation should pay money to the victim, but if it is not democratically elected, that's not the case. No, I don't believe in reparations. What's the history of overcorrection? Overcorrection, that's a good question, Walla, but overcorrection is basically we did something wrong, therefore we have to fix it and overcorrect our fixing. That's how post-colonialism works. Under command of Trump's field command, the Syrian Yozdishev were saved from further mass extermination. Huh? What are you even talking about? Opinion on war casualties is frequently divided along partisan lines, with supporters of the president focusing on strategic objectives and critics focusing on the human cost. Yeah, well said. That I agree with. You don't need to take responsibility, but don't deny the fact that it was a genocide. Yeah, the Turks perpetuated a genocide against the Armenians. I'm sorry, but they did. This is where you get into a lot of moral complexities, but you have free moral agents acting and choosing in time to do things that are evil. That's why you can blame Nazi prison guards who were just following orders. We blame Nazi prison guards. We don't excuse them for just following orders, so we can't do that with the Turks. Briefly put, why does modern Turkey not really seem to want to relate to the Ottoman Empire? Also, I've heard Turkey hates red fez hats. Now, what's up with that? The Kurds and the Yazidis, I think, might be part of the reason with the red fezzes. But the Turks have been in an interesting spot since the end of the last World War, because in some ways the Turks are European. They were part of NATO. They are considered a bulwark against communism. The United States put nuclear weapons in Turkey for quite some time and took them out during the Cuban Missile Crisis, something you probably don't know. You probably do know Gaiahan because you're a friendly neighborhood historian, but the Yoshida, look him up. Well, that sounds more Japanese, but I'm going to take your word for it, Selena girl. But the Turks probably want to modernize and democratize or pretend that they're a democracy, even though their president is not a liberal. And that makes it easier for them to relate to the West. So getting away from their imperial, the history of the Ottoman Empire, which was extraordinarily anti-European, is probably better for them geopolitically speaking. If Japan had a huge area of European white people living there during World War II, do you think they would have been ignored? Yeah, exactly. So Mosaic makes a great point. I think that's the point of the day. Shoe on the other foot. Absolutely. And that brings up another couple of questions. One, it is true that the Japanese probably would inter and done unspeakable things to the Americans. So people love to do this nowadays where it's like only the United States and the West has moral agency. Everyone else is just completely no moral agency, which I think is another form of racism. You don't think that they're accountable enough, human enough to be held accountable for bad actions. You don't think they're responsible enough to hold people of the third world responsible for the evils of their past or non-Western. So, the Japanese do not have a long-standing history of American immigration, other than Perry. And that didn't lead to immigration, that led to trade routes. The Japanese there is a long history of immigration from Japan to the United States. This is a one-way street. And if you look at the history of almost every single country, there is a long-standing history of it and the United States sharing immigrants. And the overwhelming majority are going from that country to the United States, even the English. So, I mean, people say, oh my God, this is so terrible the way the United States is now. I'm going to go live in Canada. Well, go ahead. But twice as many people move into the United States from Canada as the other way around. People who follow the media don't like this because Orange Man is bad, but Orange Man has nothing to do with it. History has something to do with it. The United States has always set itself up as an immigrant home. Is it the best home? No, but it is a home for immigrants, and there's no way to get around that historically. We cannot look to an example because you'll say, oh, well, if the Americans had been in Japan, the Japanese would have done just as bad as internment and probably much worse based off of what they did at Nanjing and the death marches of Bataan. Yes, but then you'll say, well, who cares? That didn't happen. That didn't happen. And why didn't it happen? Because the United States brought in far more immigrants from Japan than Japan ever brought in Americans. It's true. Japan is still one of the most isolated countries when it comes to immigration in the world. Of course, it's an island or a series of islands, so it's easier for them, I suppose, from a geographic perspective. But if you look at all of Japanese history, the fear of the foreigner, xenophobia, is huge in Japan. Absolutely huge. For all the great things about Japan. And I love Japan and its history, and I talk about Japan's history all the time on the channel. Japan has a bad record of xenophobia. And if you don't think Japan has been hostile to whites, look at what they did to the Christians in Nagasaki in the 17th century. Look at what the Tokugawa shogunate did to Christianity and the Jesuits and the Portuguese and the English who were there. It's not pleasant. The Dutch were the only ones who were allowed to keep trading, by the way. Again, go watch my video on the history of Christianity in Japan. It's a great question, Mosaic. In fact, I think it's the question of the day. Because it raises two more important questions. The United States has the immigration record that would allow for internment of a large segment of Japanese Americans, both foreign-born and domestically born, during the war, which is a horrible chapter in American history, which is exactly why I have this background. We need to learn this stuff. But at the same time, you also have to deal with the fact that Japan never would have had this, and if they had, they would have done horrifying atrocities far worse than any internment camp like Manzanar. It's absolutely true. Look at what Japan did. And of course, these are made by the same people who are saying they used the bomb and America is evil for using the bomb. Well, go back to yesterday's Q&A. I'm sorry to keep referring you to other stuff, but I've talked about this so much. And the more I learn about history, the more connections I see. So Mosaic, thank you for helping me to find a connection there. Those Japanese camps from World War II, there were some out here in Hawaii. Yep. The ones that are famous are in California, but there were many Japanese in Hawaii. How much of modern life is affected by Hegelian theory? That the humans strive towards more and more freedom? A lot of it. Marxism is inspired by that, so. If I ask about Norse paganism, will you be mad at me? No. I'm more than willing to take a question about it. Jupiter missiles. What about Jupiter missiles, Handy Andy? What were fascists' main gripes with progressives and conservatives? Fascists are anti-democratic. They think that conservatives were too traditional and not willing to be aggressive enough to preserve their culture, and they believe that progressives and socialists wanting worldwide revolution was a stupid idea because you should only focus on your nation. So for the fascists, the left was too nationalistic and the right was too weak. To say fascists are right-wing, though, is unfair. They allied with the right wing only because the right-wing culture apparatuses, the usual things that supported the right, like the military and the church, were necessary for them for creating a nationalist front that they could use to defeat their enemies. They were founded by socialists and communists. They operated economies and authoritarian governments that resembled that of their communist enemies, and it is not uncommon for communists to hate each other. Look at the Sino-Soviet split of the 1960s and how Mao hated Khrushchev. Is George Armstrong Custer a war criminal? Most of the men who fought wars against the natives were war criminals. By the way, you were supposed to use a slur insult Che Guevara. What happened to that? I'm never going to use a slur on this channel. Who is your favorite Norse pagan god? Probably Odin. Has a crow fly around the world for him? It's dope. Greetings, Balisarius. Good to see you. In rebranded America, the Viking shipbuilders chair is now called the African birthing chair, as if mud huts and wood chairs go together. That doesn't make sense, Odin. I've never heard that, but thank you for joining us again. Can we take the blinds off and then start calling the U.S. an empire? They have been at least since 45. They're a hegemonic empire. That's what I call the United States. And what does that mean? It means that they use their hegemony, their influence over certain areas, to act like an empire. They don't control large amounts of land like empires did, but they do have a huge spheres of influence in Latin America, Europe, and now somewhat in the Middle East. Israel certainly is part of that, and we'll see what happens with Iran. It was for a while with the Shah. One of the problems that's happening today, for those of you just joining us, I talked about this earlier, but one of the problems with what's happening today and Ali Khamenei being killed and the Iranian government seemingly toppled is that the United States had a sphere of influence in Iran. I'm just speaking from I'm not talking about morality. I'm speaking from the bare bones of what was good for American geopolitics in the 1970s in the heart of the Cold War. The United States had a sphere of influence in Iran. It wasn't a good person. I'm not saying Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was a great leader and knew how to run Iran, and Iran was this great place. It was better under him. But out of the frying pan into the fire, I guess. The United States had that and lost it. Enjoy your war on intelligence and children. I'm not fighting any wars with intelligence and with children. You love the United States. There's a lot to love about the U.S. and its history. Do you love the fact that U.S. and Israeli airstrikes killed 85 children in a school? This is the moral cost on the other side of what you have to deal with. I can talk on and on about the reasons why the strikes in Japan were necessary, but that doesn't take away from the fact that hundreds of thousands of people, many of them children and women, were killed. Many of them non-combatants. I just want you to prove that you don't feel sympathy towards Che Guevara. I don't feel sympathy towards Che Guevara. I'm not saying one has to necessarily agree or sympathize with the Confederacy, but would you say that there's at least some nobility in attending West Point but waiting to support your sovereign home state? Oh, I love Lee. I love Robert E. Lee as a general. I understand his reasoning for what he did. I understand a lot of why the South did what it did. My pushback against people who come onto this channel just to pick fights with me about my opinions of the Confederacy and Abraham Lincoln has nothing to do with what I think about I have a extremely nuanced, at least I hope an extremely nuanced view on this. I know that nuance doesn't exist in the internet world anymore. But the real truth of the matter is I have no problem with saying that Robert E. Lee was a great general and fighting for his state made sense. I understand why the Confederacy left. I just think it's bogus reasons. And I think that I've said before, if Robert E. Lee is the greatest general in American history, if you consider his stint with the Confederacy as part of American history. And he is ethnically an American, so I guess you kind of have to do that despite the fact that you're fighting against a rebel country at that point. But Robert E. Lee, if he had fought for the Union, the war would have been over in a month. Yes, well, the Vietnamese were so outraged at what the Khmer Rouge was doing, they overthrew them. Yes, communism, the far left clashing with itself happens all the time. Look at Stalin and Trotsky, which I talked about last week on the live stream lecture, which I'll talk about a little bit more tomorrow, because I'm talking about the Soviet Union tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern. The U.S. has been the military goon for the crown. Yes, that's what people say, that the U.S. is just doing the bidding of Israel. There's more to the puzzle than that, and there's more to the picture than meets the eye. Give us your comprehensive... The people who do this whole thing with Israel are like people making a jigsaw puzzle, and they're focusing on one corner. Look at this corner, look at this corner, look at this corner. I finished the puzzle. I figured it out. No, you haven't. You've figured out some things. You haven't figured out the whole thing. Yes, Israel has an influence. Yes, Israel has a reason. Yes, Israel has its fingers in the pie. I'm not denying that. I don't think anyone can deny that. But that's not the only reason this happened. It's not the snap your fingers and Trump comes running argument that people on the internet make because they don't understand how nuance works. I'm on the internet, so I know this. Give us your comprehensive opinion on Zhukov, his tactics, his weaknesses, his strength, strategy, tactics, and how he navigated the political time of his time. Basically by beating Stalin's lapdog, but also by beating the Germans. When you can actually beat off the Germans despite all of the difficulties at Stalingrad, you're going to become a hero. And even Stalin is going to have to recognize that and know. I don't know enough about the particular strategy that he took, but basically cruelty and brutality was common within the Red Army. It had been common in their traditions since Trotsky took over, and that continued under Zhukov. Do you think Marvel insulted Norse paganism by making Thor a clown, by making Loki a hero, like making a hero out of Lucifer, and how insulted Christianity? No. Does Trump, Bush, and Netanyahu belong to the same place as Hitler in history? No. No. Yeah, no again. There is a difference between acts of war, even if they are war crimes, and the perpetration of a genocide. The Nazis committed war crimes, but they also committed a genocide. They're two separate things. Some war crimes can be a genocide. You could argue that Nanjing was a genocide. How do you think World War II against Japan, World War III, would have evolved if the United States didn't use nukes? You would have had some sort of blockade and invasion of the island. You would have had the Soviets invading from the north at Hokkaido, and you would have had millions of more people die. Because you would have had basically the Japanese army fighting on the mainland against the United States and the Soviet Union, and Soviet brutality was far worse than American brutality by any metric in Eastern. Look at Eastern Europe versus Western Europe. Look at Unit 731, or not 731. Look at what happened in Romania. Look at what happened in Hungary. Look at what the Soviet army did there. You don't know about this because they don't tell you about it, as Tucker Carlson might say. Any thoughts on, is the U.S. on the rise or fall? Stagnant. I'm tired of answering this question. I'm no offense to you, Scarpion, but yeah. Can you elaborate a bit on what you said regarding fascism arising from socialists and communists? He was an Italian philosopher. He was a socialist communist who remodeled it for nationalism. I forget was it Maroni? It was an M name. And then Mussolini was kind of took his style and put it into action. Yeah. So that's what I mean, obscure. I don't mean it is originally a left-wing political. It's a left-wing political movement that takes the right-wing cultural apparatuses so that they can create an authoritarian, militaristic, aggressive government inside their own country. They are bellicose, they are anti-democratic, and they have an authoritarian command economy similar to the socialists in Russia, for instance, and they have a military, and they have a cultural heroism, cultural identity that may be racist, doesn't have to be racist, but is based on extreme patriotism that is usually associated with the right. So if anything proves horseshoe theory, it's fascism. Marvel has Constantine and Daredevil and Wolverine, and they aren't offensive to Christianity. Yep, there you go. Did you know much about Kim Il-sung as his campaign in fighting in the Korean War? Was he just a show puppet, or was there merit to his tactics and strategy? I don't think he was that successful at it. Look at Incheon. But I think that when you get the Chinese to send millions of soldiers, it's easy to claim victory. And I would say, and people and I've gotten criticism for this, and maybe it's just another historical hot take of mine, which I do on this channel from time to time. The United States won the Korean War. The purpose of the war was to take all of Korea and turn it into a communist state. That didn't happen. The United States won. The communists invaded. The U.S. didn't invade. The communists invaded. The South Koreans didn't invade. The North Koreans invaded. That was a loss for the communists, for the Soviet Union, for China, and for North Korea. Because they wanted a unified communist peninsula. The South Koreans didn't. The South Koreans got their way. The North Koreans did not. The experts say if Lincoln in 1851 barricaded the South instead of sending huge numbers of troops to the South, the war would have ended sooner with fewer casualties. I don't know if that's true, and neither do the experts. That's possibly true. Yes, people make mistakes and miscalculations in war all the time. Lincoln put McClellan in charge of the Union Army. I am not going to constantly glaze Abraham Lincoln. That's not the point of this channel. This isn't the Abraham Lincoln channel. This is a channel dedicated to history. And I'm going to talk about history. And yes, the experts have their opinions, and maybe they're right, and maybe they're wrong. They might be right, but my point is that's hindsight. And Lincoln did. I mean, I just don't know your obsession with ruining Abraham Lincoln. It's not going anywhere with me, and I don't think it's going anywhere with anyone else. Yeah. Was Pearl Harbor a hit and run, or was Japan planning on returning to conquer? It was a hit and run, but the sleeping giant was awoken, as Yamamoto said. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to look more into that. Thank you, Obscure, for your question. Why did medieval Christendom idolize ancient Rome? The Roman Catholic Church was in charge in many ways. So, thank you, X was his name, for joining us from Germany. Is there a specific period or topic we have to stick to? No, I'll take questions about anything Belisarius, even about Belisarius. Medieval Christendom is birthed out of the relationship between the political states of the barbarian tribes that conquer off the Western Roman Empire and the Roman Catholic Church, which emerges with the Pope as its leader and with Latin as its language, as the cultural and social force in that area. So you have a melding of the political and the social world, the religious world. This is the sacred and the secular mixing together, despite the efforts of the church to keep them separate. And of course, because there was this, you have the Eastern Romans going on, so they're still influential. You have this idea of these kingdoms swallowing up the power in the power vacuum lost by the Romans. You also have the legitimization of these kingdoms in a unifying form through the religion of Christianity by the Catholic Church, which is centered in Rome. So, of course, there's going to be a callback to the ancient Romans. You also have the fact that you have the Holy Roman Empire that was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, but was indeed sanctioned by the Pope. The Pope appointed and crowned the Holy Roman Emperor from Charlemagne onwards. There is a sense in which everything is Roman, or at least the echoes of Rome are going down the corridors of history. I respect you more than any other YouTuber right now. I would not have the patience or restraint for this medium. Thank you, Scourge of YouTube. And maybe today I'm just less patient than I was yesterday, but I am so tired of everyone wanting me to just abandon everything I know about history so that I can accept one perspective because they think they're introducing me to a topic or idea that I've never thought of before. I've thought of them before. Where did the CCP find its successes over the Nationalist Party? Why did the Nationalists lose and flee? They lost the peasantry. Mao promised the peasants things. The Kuomintang constantly accused the peasants of being their enemy, oppressed, killed, and stole from them and plundered them. Basically, Mao won the popularity contests, and both Mao and Chiang Kai-shek or Jiang Jiechi, were considered to be heroes after the war, but it was who's going to work better for the peasantry, and most of China was peasant at the time. Why was bread invented? I don't even know that question. I mean, people have been eating bread of all different types since the beginning of human history. To be eaten for carbs, grain. I mean, it's some of the earliest crops in the Green Revolution of the Neolithic era. What kind of support did Friedrich Engels give to Marx? He was a son of a rich business owner, ironically enough, and was able to provide Marx with stable income to do his research for Capital and for the Communist Manifesto. Can you tell us about the Crusades in the Baltics? There was an effort to basically depaganize and get rid of orthodoxy amongst Catholic Christians. These were the knights, the Teutonic Knights of Germany were the main ones who led incursions into these areas to help them become Catholic. I don't know a huge amount about them, but they occurred mainly in the 13th and 14th centuries, and sometimes a little bit before. I wouldn't use a slur against anyone. I'm not going to do that here. How different were Christian and pagan nations in the Middle Ages? Very. But they eventually became the same as Christianity, kind of conquered and force converted these areas that had been pagan. Can you elaborate on Caesar Nero, the Mark of the Beast? So this is the book of Revelation in the Bible, and many people believe that it is a historical book. It is not a future predictive book that actually uses Old Testament prophecy and ideas of Old Testament prophets to basically say that Nero and the Roman Empire was the evil force that was trying to destroy Christianity, and the Mark of the Beast is supposed to be a reference to Nero himself, that anyone who was following the Mark of the Beast was evil. It was a way to divide the Christians from the secular world that was persecuting them during the time of the Roman Emperor Nero. I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying what the Christians wrote. If you want to go back to yesterday and I say, oh, the Christians claim Jesus rose from the dead. Well, you believe Jesus resurrected. You're a religious channel. What? Nuance. I'm saying this is what they believe. I've never said it's my belief. What was the biggest battle of ever in the Western Hemisphere? The 3 days of Gettysburg or the Stalingrad-esque second battle of Tenochtitlan? Ooh, Tenochtitlan's probably a little bit bigger. How and when, but the casualties of Gettysburg were probably higher. You had higher populations. How and when was the Spain conquered during the Arab conquest, and how did that invasion end? The Umayyads, working with the Berbers and others, were able to overwhelm the Visigothic kingdoms that were pretty divided at the time and conquer all of Spain and Portugal, which became Al-Andalus. Will you send me an email and talk about Che Guevara and use a slur for him? No, I'm not going to do that. Well, Andalus or Andalusia. Andalusia is a region in Spain that is named for that relationship. Obviously, regime changes are still running wild in the modern day, but would you say that the Christian-Muslim borders are pretty much set in stone? No. Do you think some cities came before agriculture, like archaeologists think? It's possible. Most people our age aren't interested in history. Don't let anybody change you. No one's changing me. Hopefully, no, but people give me new information. They give me new ways of thinking of things. But when I say no one's changing me, I mean I am not changing my love of this. I'm not changing what I'm doing. There are many times where I'm disheartened or I think things aren't going right with the channel, and I'm just like, just keep doing it. Just, you love this. If you love it, keep doing it. Eventually, it will bear fruit. Could be a while, but my goal last year was to get monetized. We got monetized. My goal this year is to make this the main thing that I do in my life. I don't know if that's going to happen, but you can help us help it happen by liking and subscribing, because we're trying to get to 20,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We're at just over 11,000, so we're halfway there. It would be we're in a dash. We're 2 months in, but it would be really nice to have your support with that. After the slaughter of the people who refused Isla. Okay, well, if you email me, then it's not your channel. Faraz, I'm not going to do this. I'm not sending you a slur about Che Guevara. It's immoral. Just because I think somebody is evil doesn't mean I'm going to use a slur of him. Robert Mugabe is evil. And no one has ever asked me to use the N-word to refer to Robert Mugabe. How many Japanese planes did USA put down during Pearl Harbor? Don't know off the top of my head. It is easier to digest and provides more energy and has power the population expansion of many cultures. It's just that how did they know about bread's power? I think it was what was easy to grow. The Egyptians were able to grow wheat very quickly and easily. Crop rotation was quite common, so wheat was one of the things you could grow. It was what was able to grow and what could be used, and it could be used for a number of different things. And of course, you have the main use was bread. I'm not saying a racial slur. If a slur is not racial, then it's okay. Okay, racial is R-A-C-I-A-L, but no, I'm not going to say a slur is almost always racial. I'm not going to call him a curse word or something like that. I'm just not going to do that. Well, with your help, X was his name, I will reach my goals. Can you tell us about the early Goetic peoples, where they originated from, their early kingdoms of Del Rayata, how they formed or became interwoven into other groups in Ireland? I'm just going to save you the trouble. I just don't know enough about it. If I don't know about something, I'm going to be honest with you and say I don't know instead of try to BS my way through something. But Belisarius, I'm going to have to look into the Goetic peoples. I have learned a lot from the people on the channel. Jake Shuriken, who taught me all about the Spear of a Nation and the militant side of the South African anti-apartheid movement and South rule movement. So, anyways, have you read the book Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman? No, but I probably should. He's a great writer. I'm going to sign off. If you become a member, you can join us for the next 45 minutes. I'll be doing more Q&A, probably more in depth with some of my members. We'll see if anyone shows up to that. No pressure whatsoever, but it'd be nice to just do a members-only Q&A, which is usually more relaxed, and I can go into a lot more detail because there's not a lot of people, and there's more space to let questions breathe. So yeah, consider becoming a member. We got like 20 people became members yesterday because of gifts. So why is Nelson Mandela taught as some sort of good person in school? There's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad. I think we need to look at him in that way. You could ask the same question of George Washington. I'm sorry, Guy Han, to be so flippant, but I'm going to sign off. So that's a good question, but there's more to unpack. Mandela was not perfect, but Mandela's work was necessary. I did enjoy it. Thank you so much for coming. Please like and subscribe on your way out. Join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern for our live stream lecture as I finish wrapping up, hopefully, the Soviet Union. And I also, of course, have long and short form content that you guys can check out at any time. Go watch my live stream lecture on the Middle East and my long form video on the history of Islam if you want to learn more about what's going on today with Iran. I'm not wearing a kimono. This is a smoking jacket. It turns me into History Hefner. It turns me from friendly history into History Hefner. And it is inspired by British troops who brought it back after their war with the Turks during the Crimeans, or war with the Turks against the Russians in the Crimean War in the 1850s. So Roger, you just learned a little bit about history. What position do you think the average person will hold under corporate governance for stakeholder capitalism? I have no idea. Pawns. All right. Take care. See you guys later. Join us for the live stream lecture tomorrow. Yes, with History Hefner. But I might not be running the rope. And hopefully you become a member, and we'll see you over on the Members Only Live. Take care. Have a great one. And as always, love history. Bye-bye now.